Let's get going. All right. All right. I'm here with the voice of Rutgers football on the radio. I'm here with Chris Carlin. Chris, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. How you doing today?
I'm great, Alec. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well myself, thank you. So, like I said, you're the voice of Rutgers football for, now they are with, I believe, WFAN. Is that right?
Yeah, the games are on WFAN. They started being on the fan last year, and the basketball games are on WCBS. So, really terrific exposure for both programs to be on there.
Absolutely. And you've worked a lot with WFAN, whether it's, having a show or doing broadcast for football or producing or things like that. So what has that been like, bringing the football games where, bringing almost two different worlds together for you?
Yeah, it's strange. The early part of my career, first 13 years or so, was spent at WFAN in different capacities. Then, a couple of years from 2018 to 2019, I was back there. I'm at ESPN now. But listen, it was always a station I was obviously very fond of, having worked there as long as I did, and got involved with Rutgers when in 2001 when Coach Shiano got hired. I was doing sideline reporting for the first 3 years on the radio, and then Tom McCarthy, who does the Phillies and CBS National, and he's doing the opener against Northwestern on CBS. He was our play-by-play announcer, and Tom moved up with the Phillies, and I got this opportunity, and it's been an absolute blast ever since. I love Rutgers. It's just been a place that's really become a second home for me.
And it's pretty funny. You mentioned that Tom McCarthy will be on that national broadcast for CBS on that opening game, as will be Jason McCourty. So it's kind of
Yeah,
like it's pretty funny. It's an all Rutgers broadcast.
yeah, it is. It's funny. It's so bizarre for me. It feels like yesterday we're calling Jason and Devin's games, and now they're retired from the NFL. It just makes me feel even older. But man, it's so awesome to see those two guys doing what they're doing right now. And Thomas, he's such a good friend. He's a mentor. He's meant so much to me, and it's going to be great to see him.
Yeah, and I hate to pile on, but the McCourty twins, like you said, those are guys that I grew up watching when I was a kid, and now I guess you could say that I'm almost peers with them. So that's pretty interesting.
Well, they still got a few years on you, but yeah,
Yeah,
it is bizarre to me to see it, but it's not surprising in the least, because if you knew them back then, you knew how well spoken they were, and you knew how well they just could really break down the game. So they've been right where they should be. In Good Morning Football, and Devin now doing Sunday Night Football on NBC. It's absolutely nuts.
yeah, and so now you're going into your 20th year. Doing the play-by-play for Rutgers football, and you mentioned how you got your start 13 years at WFAN. How did you get into the sports media industry, as a whole?
It was kind of an accident, to tell you the truth. I went to Hobart College in upstate New York, which was a small Division III liberal arts college. It was known for lacrosse primarily back then. And I went there thinking I was going to be a lawyer. And I took some classes related to that, and I figured out pretty quickly that wasn't going to be for me. But I fell into it because, I mean, it's kind of a bizarre story, but basically what happened was, I had a guy on my floor freshman year who knew I was a big sports fan, and he came up to me one day and he said, what are you doing this weekend? It's like, what? And not much. He said, do you want to do color commentary on the football broadcast? Because the person who had been doing it was a senior and a former player who had gotten in trouble at a bar downtown. He had gotten pretty drunk and was being completely obnoxious, and somebody at the bar decided they'd had enough, and they went up behind him and they pulled his pants down as a joke, and that didn't go over well. He turned around and punched the first person he saw, and that was an off-duty cop. So needless to say, he was asked to not return to the broadcast booth, and they needed somebody quickly, and they ended up putting me on the sideline for the first couple of games, and I completely fell in love with doing it, and thought about transferring to a school that specialized more in it. But at the same time, I was getting to do all these games at Hobart because nobody was really all that interested in doing it. And, it was an incredible experience. So that's how I initially got into it. And, out of college, sent out 100 letters, did not get one job interview. And, during college, I worked in minor league baseball. The Geneva Cubs, who are now the Williamsport Crosscutters, were in town, and their games aired on the radio station on campus. So I did games there for a couple of years and interned and did all the menial jobs with it. And, lucked out to get an internship at WFAN, and kind of the rest is history from there.
Yeah, and this is why I love asking this question, how did you get your start? Because it feels like every single person has a different kind of story. I mean, like you said, it was almost an accident. And I'm sure, in your time working in sports media at many different places, you've heard countless different stories about how people got their start as well.
Yeah. And it really shows that there's not one direct path to it. The programs at Rutgers and schools like that are absolutely phenomenal. And we've seen a lot of guys come out of Rutgers and have an awful lot of success doing this. And, there's a lot of pride in that, watching that happen. For me, it was really just about kind of eliminating the word no from my vocabulary and willing to do whatever it was I had to do. When I was working at FAN, I worked there for 7-8 years off the air first, before I really got a chance to be on the air. And, they hated me at it at first, but, the more you're willing to do for your boss and the more you're willing to be the person that they can rely on, the more chances they are willing to give you. And that's how it worked out for me.
Yeah, definitely. And in my time, granted, it's only a short time in doing, all kinds of sports media, definitely the biggest piece of advice, or the most common piece of advice that I've heard, is don't be afraid to, do something you're not comfortable with, or don't, pretty much what, like you said,
Yep.
never say no. I guess like a story for me is I got my start, actually doing broadcasting for Rutgers sports, because, one of my friends ended up getting sick for a weekend, and there were two games. I did an NCAA tournament soccer game when I had never called a soccer game. I had never called any game before. And then I did, a football game, and, not just any football game versus Penn State. Now, granted, Rutgers lost that game pretty heftily, but I mean, pretty inauspicious start, I'd say. I mean, yeah, I definitely agree that, never be afraid to do something that you're not comfortable with.
It's the most important thing that you can do. I hear coaches say it, and it is so true in life. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Put yourself in the spots to challenge yourself. I never, ever considered television as a route for me. And I ended up working in TV for 8 years and hosting the Mets pre and post game show and a debate show on SNY. That was never something that was in the cards, I thought. But opportunities just kind of presented themselves with the harder you worked. Again, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, you started when Coach Giano got the head coaching job at Rutgers back in 2001. So if we're looking more towards the current in Rutgers football, would you say that there's any big differences that you've seen in terms of, Coach Giano himself, in terms of how he coaches in his second stint versus his first stint at Rutgers?
I think first of all, I think it's a taller mountain to climb than it was the first time around. And it was a tall mountain to climb the first time around. When he got here, there were so many things that had to be changed, facilities, stuff like that. And now, second time around, you're in a completely different conference, building that up, trying to catch up to schools like Ohio State and Michigan, places like that. And then you're also dealing with NIL. You're dealing with all this different stuff that has changed in college football since. So those are the big differences in terms of what he has to work with to try to make things happen. At the same time, in terms of how he approaches things, I don't see a difference other than he has experienced the recruiting process and the coaching process now from the father's side, as he did, with his own kids getting recruited to be athletes. So I think he probably has a broader perspective on that. That's been valuable to him. But the one thing that always comes to mind when I think of Greg is attention to detail. And he pays attention to every detail because he believes the small things are incredibly important. And that is still there. And it's a lesson that I've learned in my life. The small things are incredibly important.
Yeah, and you brought up a very good point that I actually hadn't thought of before, is that, as, his coaching career has gone on, his own kids have, grown up and become athletes themselves. So seeing that, recruiting aspect from a different, I guess, a different side, is definitely going to change your perspective from, just only seeing one side for your entire career. So, with Schiano back and like you mentioned, NIL being a factor in college sports now, something that, even Coach Chris Ash or Kyle Flood didn't have to deal with when they were here. So how would you say the program itself, the, I guess, perspective of it has changed with Coach Schiano back as compared to the, two previous coaches?
Well, I mean, listen, and it's nothing against those two guys. I think they both in their own rights did, some really good work here. And I know that the wins and losses were not what people wanted, but at the same time, they did some good things here. I think with Coach Schiano, more than anything, what you see is a renewed confidence in coaches and players in the state in what he's doing. Where he has an incredible advantage, where maybe guys like that didn't necessarily, is that a lot of the coaches, a lot of the parents in this state saw him do it before. They know what this is about. They know that he can build this, and this can be an incredibly special place to play football. And I've seen that up close, and I've seen some things that I never thought I would see at Rutgers, but we have. And that's what gives you the faith to know that we're going to see that again. I think that's where his biggest, the biggest benefit for him has come, is that people understand that this is something he's done before.
Yeah, and that was a big reason why a good portion of Rutgers fans, most of them actually thought, this is the only guy we can go after during the coaching search in 2019. I mean, there was pretty much almost a completely public campaign for Coach Schiano. What was going through that like, as, maybe not a fan, but more as a broadcaster and covering the team?
We understood where the fans were coming from because of that very reason. They had seen it before. And let's be honest, okay? New Jersey does not make it easy for you. Rutgers does not always make it easy for you. There are an awful lot of hoops you got to jump through to get some easy things done at times. And I think the phrase I would use would be institutional knowledge, understanding how the university works, understanding how the state works, and understanding how to get things done. And that's just a huge benefit, I think. For whatever reason, the state and nobody in particular or anything, or the university, there are just a lot of ways that things are done that you have to go through, and you're still working to get them done, maybe a little bit harder than everybody else has to. So just to give you an example, okay? I don't know, this is 2016. I was working for Sirius XM Radio, and I was sent on a training camp tour, doing interviews in the SEC at Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Auburn. And our first stop was Georgia. And we went out and saw their new indoor practice facility. Well, they had just built it. It cost $30 million. They were planning on raising 15 million and then just taking 15 million out of the coffers. First of all, 15 million laying around in the coffers. That's one thing. They raised 22.5 million in 3 days. When you're at Georgia and in the South, that's everything. Those places are everything. At Rutgers, you are right between New York and Philadelphia, and it's a great thing to be right in the middle between those two metropolises, but there is an awful lot to fight for your entertainment dollar. And that's why the competition there for Rutgers is more difficult. And frankly, here's the other part. You built that facility for $30 million at the time. That would have cost triple up here as opposed to down there. So it's just a lot of logistical things that are not easy to get done, that it takes a lot more here, frankly, to get done.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with everything you said there. I mean, when you're going down south, I mean, that's if it's a Saturday in, like you said, Georgia, I mean, that's probably what everyone's doing, is tuning into either Georgia or maybe Georgia Tech or something like that. So yeah, it's a great point about, just how different it is to build at Rutgers as compared to other places. And
Mm-hmm.
would you say that, that confidence, that the confidence in Rutgers athletics as a whole has, built since joining the Big Ten as compared to when they were still in the Big East?
I mean, listen, I think so. And I think there's been a lot of gross misrepresentations about what's going on in Rutgers athletics as part of the Big Ten. And frankly, it's kind of aggravating. I read a story about that kind of stuff lately. And here's what I know. Rutgers wouldn't be in the Big Ten if they didn't add a lot of value to the Big Ten financially. And I think we've seen in basketball, I think we've seen in many of the Olympic sports competitively, and I think we've seen that Rutgers can compete in football when they're able to have the time and that they need to build it. And I think we've seen in the past, listen, I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that something is what it isn't. They haven't won nearly as many games as people would have wanted since joining the conference, but they've had some pretty good moments, and I do think there is a consistency that's being built here in the future. The other thing I would say is, we've been an easy target for a while, and that's fine. I don't hear any of the other schools complaining when the check clears. I don't hear anybody else complaining about that when, they can see their games in the New York market. And that's why Rutgers is in the Big Ten, because it does, when things are going well for football, it does command attention here. There is no question about that. I have seen it.
Yeah, and you mentioned you have seen it. One of the biggest examples that I can think of off the top of my head, you go back to one particular day, November 9th, 2006, the Empire State Building is glowing scarlet. And that's the day that, Rutgers stood atop the college football world. And you had a legendary moment saying it's pandemonium in Piscataway. So I guess not even just that one particular moment, but what was that whole, maybe not even the day, but the entire experience around, that game and the immediate aftermath? What was that like?
First of all, I remember so many things about the day. And then number one thing is that the traffic was just brutal to get there. I left my house at like 1 o'clock in Queens, and I didn't physically park and get to the stadium until like 5:30. And that was a 7 o'clock game or a 7:30 game, because it was so nuts. People trying to get in. I had people asking me for tickets for 2 weeks. And I think I got 18 tickets to the game, and I came up 16 short. That's how nuts it was. But to me, one of the best moments going into it was always going to just be those few minutes before kickoff, when that place is going insane. The towels are waving everywhere. And I just kind of leaned out and looked out the window. And I won't lie, I teared up a little bit because, I had at that point only been there, 5 years. I knew so many people who had been there for 30, 35, 40 years, and what this meant to them to see it. And, when I got there in 2001 and 2002, you could pick tickets up off the ground outside the stadium and walk in. And, just seeing what that was like was nuts. And then, of course, we know what happened. Just an unbelievable night. And certainly one that is right up there. It's going to be difficult for me to even fathom that we're like, 2.5, 3 years away from it being 20 years since that happened. It's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, that wow. I didn't even realize that until you said that. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, we're a couple of years away from it, but it's hard to believe right now that we're 17 years removed from that.
Yeah. And what are some other moments that have really stood out to you in terms of, you know, things you'll look back on as this was one of my favorite moments in my entire career? Maybe not even just Rutgers football, but anything.
Oh man. I mean, if we're talking about Rutgers, uh, there are plenty to choose from. I think of an emotional week in 2009 when Rutgers was playing UConn, and UConn had lost tragically a player named Jasper Howard to a shooting the week before, and he was very tight with Rutgers receiver Tim Brown, and Tim was such an incredibly likable kid. And with, I feel like it was about 15 seconds left in the game, um, and Rutgers down by 4. Tim caught like a 15-yard pass and went 70 yards for a touchdown to win it. It was just an amazing moment for him, and seeing him hold up the number of his best friend. I think about nights like that. I think about um, when Eric LeGrand got hurt in 2010, and what that experience was like, and then uh, seeing him come out of the tunnel the next year against West Virginia in the snow with Scott Vallone and Kasim Green and Devin Watkins, and um, Coach Yano at the bowl game that year. Eric was up in the booth with us at Yankee Stadium, and at the end, Rutgers beat Iowa State, and he gets on the microphone in the whole stadium, and he's yelling, "Big E, Big E, this is for you," and you know, just things like that were just absolutely incredible to see.
And you mentioned Eric LeGrand. He now I believe does he still works with the radio crew, right?
He does home games with us, and then he offers commentary on the pre and post game shows on the road.
So what has it been like working with him as you've seen him since his injury, you know, become almost a national figure?
Joy, just just a joy. He We had dinner the other night as a whole crew, and just seeing him laugh. He's so funny. He's so engaging. Admittedly, it's hard to get to know a lot of the players when they're playing, because there's just so many of them. And I get to know some of them the best I can. Eric, I really didn't know too well before the injury, but he's become a dear friend. I'd do anything for him, and just what he means to the university, what he means to the program. You know, the fact that he is always been of the belief that this happened to him for a reason, because he could handle it, and um, he's just incredible, and it always makes me happy to see him every couple of weeks when we're getting ready to do a game.
Yeah, and the his foundation and the Walk to Believe has been I actually unfortunately I had not been able to go due to all kinds of scheduling conflicts as is how life works when you're in middle school and high school. But this
Mm-hmm.
year I finally got to go for the first time, and you know, you could feel just how much of a community there is around, you know, his foundation and, you know, what he means to, like you said, this university.
Yeah, he's been incredible, the amount of money that he has raised for the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, um, and Team Legrand is part of it. Uh, it's it's just incredibly inspiring to watch. And the guy's gone out and he started all these endeavors. Like, nothing is keeping him from doing what he wants to do, whether it's starting a whiskey or opening a coffee shop. That he's getting after it. He's not held back at all by what happened to him, and um, I truly do believe that there is going to be a day that we see him go to MetLife Stadium and get back up off that turf. I fully believe that's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's something that he's said for many years is what he really wants to. And it's really hard to say anything otherwise than, yeah, I believe you. You can do it. Just keep working towards it.
Yeah. And he's hung in there, but I think it's just more than anything the real grinder mentality that he's always had, that he had as a player. He was always one of coach's favorites. I mean, that was a guy that as a freshman, think about this, as a true freshman, went from playing linebacker to playing fullback to playing defensive end to playing nose guard in the span of 4 weeks. Think about that. And I mean, that's nuts. But they knew they could trust him to do it. And they knew what they had in him as a player from not just a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint. And he was a terrific player like that for sure.
And you mentioned the LeGrand Coffee House in Woodbridge.
Mm.
Have you been there at all
Yeah,
or often at all?
I've been there a couple times. Yeah. I live over in Lawrenceville, so I don't get there as much as I would like. I certainly have my share of the whiskey, that's for sure. We have some in the house, and we have some LeGrand coffee in the house too. And I am absolutely an iced coffee guy, so I hit it up and it hits the spot. Yeah, I'm on top of it.
Yeah, I've never been, so I'm thinking, definitely got to
It's
hit that
great.
at
It's a
some
great
point.
setup, and they've got great food, and it's a really nice coffee house environment.
Yeah, so again, for those who are listening or watching, in our last episode, we talked with NJ Advanced Media's Brian Fonseca. He gave us some good food spots in New Brunswick. But if you're in the area, go to Woodbridge and hit up LeGrand Coffee House.
Oh
I
yeah,
definitely will.
no question, absolutely.
So if we shift more towards the present day, what's your outlook on this year's team for this upcoming football season? As the opener is about, I want to say a little less than 2 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks away.
I'm pretty optimistic about everything that's going on. I think they have a chance to have a really good defense this year. And I think you have a chance to have a really improved offense. I like what I've seen from the offensive line so far. I think Pat Flaherty is going to do a tremendous job with that group. And when you have a guy that's been an offensive line coach for a Super Bowl champion with the Giants back in 2007 and is so incredibly respected, I think it's going to be a great fit for us. He's been on the staff the last couple of years, but now he's the full-time offensive line coach. I think he'll be terrific. I also think that you will see some weapons this year, the likes of a receiver named Jaquay Jackson, who I think's got a chance, who is a transfer. We all know about Robert Monangai and Sam Brown and Shorty Salam and what those guys are capable of. And then at the same time, you've got Gavin Wimsatt, who everybody is going to be looking for. I watch Gavin now with a new offensive coordinator in Kirk Shiraka. The ball comes out of his hand differently. I think he's got a little more explosion behind it. He's continuing to learn, but I think Gavin has a chance to be a pretty good quarterback this year. And, he got some invaluable experience this past season. So let's see how this plays out. But I'm very optimistic about this season. I really am. I think they have a real good chance to take a step forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gavin Wimsatt. I mean, I believe he's still only 19 years old. For a 19-year-old, he has a ton of experience as he joined the team during his senior season of high school football and then played last year when he should have been a true freshman. I mean, in that game against Illinois in 2021, he came in on a fourth down as his first career play and threw a strike for a first down. What was that like when you're setting up the play and all of a sudden you see the 4-star that should be playing high school football in Kentucky right now
Yeah.
come out for a fourth down?
It's kind of like I'm double checking my eyes. Wait, is that? Oh my God! they're throwing him. I mean, you talk about throwing him into the fire. That's really doing it. Listen, I thought it was terrific to see at the time. He's going to have his bumps in the road as he did last year, but I'd be very surprised if he didn't play much better this year.
Yeah, and so I guess for the team overall, let's say the over-under is set at 5.5 wins, which basically means a bowl or no bowl. What would you say right now?
I think they can get to a bowl game. I think they can absolutely get to a bowl game this year. I think the Northwestern game right out of the gate becomes incredibly important. Those first 3 home games with Northwestern, Temple, and Virginia Tech, if you can find a way to get those 3 games, you've done a heck of a job, and that sets you up in decent stead there moving forward. I think they've got a really good chance to get to a bowl game this year. Just have to stay healthy. That's everything, right? We can talk about that kind of stuff, about what the prospects are, but if you can't keep your best players on the field, it's going to be very difficult to get that done when you have guys who are still developing and on their way up. I think they're going to be in good shape if they can keep everybody healthy.
So let's say if any opposing fans are watching or listening, if you had to give them one word to describe Coach Greg Schiano, what would you use?
Relentless. I think relentless would be the word. He doesn't, I've never met a person with more energy in my life, and I don't know how he does it, but it's incredible to watch. It's fun to watch. I've been fortunate to get to know Greg and call him a friend for the last 20 years, even when he was away. And I'm thrilled he's back, but the word's relentless. He's never going to stop until we get to where he wants this to be. Never.
Now, I guess to close it off, you've done plenty in your career, at many, many different places. If there's one wish that you think that you had, say, this is what I want to do before, I hang up the microphone, for lack of a better term, what would you say is the one thing that you really want to either attend or cover or anything like that?
I want to host a game show, man. Honestly, like I love doing everything I get to do. I've been fortunate enough to get to do everything that I have. I've called NFL games on ESPN radio. That's NFL games. That's the highest of the high. College basketball, college football on ESPN radio. I've done plenty of TV. All that stuff. Like there isn't a whole lot that I haven't done. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have to call a Super Bowl for me to be complete. But the game show thing has always intrigued me. Like I love that, that's so different. And I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of different things. So I don't know that there's one thing in the broadcasting world other than that. If you gave me a game show, like I'd go do that for the next 20 years and we'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to say, when I was thinking this question up, I was thinking like there are plenty of things that you could have said. That was not one of them. So I appreciate that.
Sure. I mean, listen, everybody loves to broadcast the big events. I also have an incredible need for you to know what I think. And that's why I love doing talk shows. And it's all great, but I can't point to one thing that I haven't done yet and say, God, my career is not going to be complete unless I've done that. Like I will know at this point that I've had a chance to do a lot of different things, and I've been very, very lucky to do it.
All right. Well, Chris, this has been a great time. Thank you so much for giving us some time today to talk to us.
My pleasure, Alec. Thanks, man. Looking forward to a good season.
Yeah, and you can find Chris, or you're working for ESPN, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen on the radio, even on First Take at some points. So be sure to if you ever watching ESPN or listen to ESPN, you hear or see Chris Carlin. Yeah, that's you know some of his background now. So yeah. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. Be sure to stay tuned for the next episode of the What's Choppin' podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And so this has been a great 4th episode. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.